Hey there, Chiefs fans. Thanks for tuning in. In today's episode, we'll analyze the Chiefs' chances of winning the AFC West, as well as breaking down their first 4 opponents of the season. I'll give you my predictions for the outcome of each of those games. As always, we'll have the latest headlines from Arrowhead. If you like what you hear, hit subscribe. If you don't like what you hear, leave a comment. Let us know. Thanks for tuning in. This is the Red and Gold Report. Alright, before we get into this first segment here today, I wanted to give a shout out to a couple of our listeners over on YouTube. So, first off, shout out to Big Chiefers for the subscription. Obviously a smart guy. If you have not subscribed yet, do so now. Secondly, Cam Davis weighed in with his thoughts on our segment last week on whether or not Patrick Mahomes would make it to the Pro Bowl. Cam with a very confident vote of yes. I hope he is correct. If you want to hear my thoughts on it, find last week's segment. You can find it on our channel. All right, this segment here is another one of those segments that has been slowly building in my mind over the course of the offseason. Going back to spring, even before the draft, I started to hear over and over again from different sports analysts their predictions on who would win the AFC West. Now, you would think that with the Chiefs coming off of back-to-back division titles, that they would be the clear favorite, but that hasn't been the case. Now, a big part of that, I know, is because in the offseason, in those summer months, football isn't on people's minds. A lot of those guys who follow the NFL for a living, it's tough for them to generate interest. So they want a headline that's going to generate that interest. And picking the incumbent to repeat isn't going to get as many clicks. It's not going to generate as much of a buzz as, say, picking a bit of a dark horse, right? So if you pick the Patriots to win the Super Bowl and published an article about that in mid-May, you're not going to get very many people click on it because that's not attention grabbing. In the same way, picking a division winner, if you pick the incumbent, it's not as exciting as if you go out there and you pick someone who is a little bit of a dark horse. So unsurprisingly, we saw a lot of that this offseason. Everybody's favorite is the Los Angeles Chargers. Now, I'll get into here in just a minute some of my reasons why I think people should pump the brakes on that storyline. But before I do, I want to segue into some thoughts that I had on the division with a little bit of a story. So this weekend, I was out of the state, and I was staying in a hotel, and I was laying there in bed, doing what I always do, skimming through the headlines, checking up on Chiefs news. You know how it is when training camp first gets back into the swing of things, and you really just want to bask in the glory of football being back, and you want to see every day, 3, 4, 5 times a day, you're checking those headlines. What's going on in St. Joe? And it was one of those times, and I'm sure you've had this happen, where I should have been asleep like an hour earlier, and yet I'm still there scrolling through the headlines. And it was right about the time that I got halfway through an article about Sammy Watkins getting a haircut that I had this moment, kind of a, what am I doing with my life? I should have been in bed an hour ago, and here I am reading a story about a Chiefs wide receiver's haircut. And it hit me. I thought, the reason that I'm reading this story is because there's really not a lot interesting going on in St. Joe. I mean, yeah, Patrick Mahomes is interesting, but as far as eye-grabbing headlines, the Chiefs just don't have any of that going on right now. And at first, I was kind of bummed by that, right? Like, well, football's back in the swing of things. I want some Chiefs news. But then it hit me, and I realized, no news is good news at this point in the season. Really, the only news that's going to make headlines, the only thing that's going to make the ticker on ESPN right now is basically one of 2 stories: an injury or some kind of a contract dispute holdout situation. And the fact that the Chiefs don't have any of that going on, and therefore don't have any headlines, is actually a good thing. Because if you look around the rest of the AFC West right now, you have multiple storylines that are not good storylines. The Chargers have had, in very stereotypical Chargers fashion, just a slew of bizarre injuries. In Oakland, the only thing that anybody wants to talk about is Khalil Mack holding out. That situation is rapidly deteriorating. I've heard some speculation now that Oakland may be looking to trade Khalil Mack if they can't come to an agreement. And meanwhile in Denver, granted, I'll give Denver this, their training camp has been fairly quiet. No real injury news to speak of. Haven't heard of any contract situations. But their storylines all through the offseason leading up to training camp were not storylines that you would expect to see from a team who is projected to have very much, if any, success this year. And the perfect example of that is, at the end of last year, I would say the majority, probably a significant majority of Broncos fans, wanted their head coach, Vance Joseph, fired and are upset right now that he wasn't. They had multiple assistants and coordinators who were axed, really going back to even during the season last year. So you have a franchise in Denver who is in complete turmoil. You have a franchise in Oakland who, got a new coach, but a guy who's been out of the league for, I think it's 17 years. And their second best player, other than their quarterback, is nowhere to be found. And as Gruden mentioned in an interview recently, hasn't even been in contact with the team or with Gruden. So you've got chaos in Denver. You've got major contract dispute in Oakland. And then you have San Diego, who is everybody's darling, everybody's hot pick to win the division, with numerous injuries already. And then meanwhile, you have the Kansas City Chiefs, with no real news coming out of Chiefs camp. It's business as usual, standard operating procedure. And as depressed as that makes me when I search Kansas City Chiefs news and storylines, that's a really good thing. And I believe that, more than anything on the field right now, is what is slowly, in my opinion, moving the Chiefs into that spot where I think they are a realistic favorite, or soon will be a realistic favorite to win the division, even though all through the offseason, everybody and their brother wanted to pick Los Angeles. Now, I'm going to finish this segment talking a little bit about the Chargers, since they, in my mind, and in probably most Kansas City Chiefs minds right now, are public enemy number one, because they're everybody's darling to win this division. I believe the Chargers have a decent shot at winning this division. I think they will be the Chiefs' toughest opponent this year, but I'm not ready to buy all in on the Chargers just yet. So, to put this into perspective, you have to look at the last 4 years, because the Kansas City Chiefs, since Andy Reid has been here, with the exception of his first year, the Kansas City Chiefs have dominated the Los Angeles Chargers. And I mean dominated. The Chargers' last win over the Chiefs was in December of 2013. To put that into perspective, Barack Obama was less than 1 full year into his second term as president the last time the Chargers beat the Chiefs. The Chargers have lost 8 straight to the Chiefs with an average margin of victory of 12.4, 2 full possessions. The Chargers have not won the AFC West since 2009. Again, to put that into perspective, the easiest example to use is the presidency. George W. Bush had been out of office for less than a year the last time the Chargers won this division. Last season, when the Chargers kind of became everybody's darling by finishing the season, their last 12 games, I think they went 9-3. And that was when they really started to get a buzz going. Last year, in 8 quarters against the Chiefs, the Chargers scored 2 touchdowns. Now let's get into some of these injuries already. I have a close friend who is a Chargers fan, diehard Chargers fan, and he told me months ago, he said, I hate it when there's hype around the Chargers in the offseason, because every year that leads to freak injuries, bizarre endings to games, and like the stars just align to keep the Chargers from being successful. And it's already happened. It's already happening. Picking the Chargers to win the division is like rewatching the movie Titanic and expecting the boat to miss the iceberg. There's this grand beginning, right? Oh, this wonderful ship, a marvel of modern technology, and the happy little love story, and then the Chargers are the same way. There's all this hype. They've got a great defense. They've got a great pass rush. Their secondary is going to be phenomenal. Phillip Rivers finally has weapons, blah, blah, blah. But it's like the beginning of the Titanic. You know, you get about halfway through it and you think, I've seen this before, and I'm pretty sure everybody dies. That's kind of what the Chargers are like. And we're already seeing this year. Back in OTAs, Hunter Henry, an emerging star, a great weapon for Phillip Rivers, blows out his knee, and the story I heard was that he was bending over to pick up a football or something just bizarre. Hunter Henry, third-year pro. In the last 2 years, he's had 1,000 yards receiving and 12 touchdowns. Great red zone target, and he's gone for the year. A few days ago, cornerback Jason Verrett, a Pro Bowl cornerback, tears his Achilles during the conditioning segment of practice. And now, the latest news here this week, the other cornerback, opposite of Jason Verrett, who you just lost, Trevor Williams, left practice with an ankle injury, was seen later on in a boot and on crutches. We don't know any specifics about that yet, but Trevor Williams was going to be a second-year pro, but he started 15 games across from Jason Verrett. Now, the Chargers are missing both of their starting cornerbacks. They're missing their tight end, Hunter Henry. I mean, to put it into an equivalent for Chiefs fans, that would be like if we lost Travis Kelce and then Kendall Fuller and Steven Nelson. I mean, that would change the complexity of the season. Make no mistake. And again, they're in these just bizarre freak accidents. I mean, who tears an Achilles warming up? Who blows out their knee bending over to pick up a football? And the other thing that blows my mind is I've heard several major personalities in sports recently give just bizarre and terrible evidence for why they believe the Chargers will knock the Chiefs off of the AFC West throne this year. For instance, Colin Cowherd. And I really like Colin Cowherd. I like his show. I listen to it fairly often. I think he does a really good job. But he picked the Chargers to win the division, and his reasoning as to why he felt that they had jumped the Chiefs this offseason was he said, well, the Chiefs lost Marcus Peters and they lost Tamba Ali. That defense is going to struggle. Those were the two pieces of evidence that he gave. Tamba Ali? Tamba Ali has started in exactly 2 games in the last 2 years. Only played in 5 games total last year. And that's 50% of the evidence that Colin Cowherd gave as to why he thinks the Chiefs will give up the division title to the Chargers this year. Also, Jeffrey Chadilla, in an interview just today, I heard him making his case as to why he thinks this is Phillip Rivers' year. This is the Chargers' year. And the interviewer, I felt, did a great job and brought up the fact that, Phillip Rivers has always struggled against the Chiefs. Again, the Chargers offense scored 2 touchdowns in 8 quarters last year against the Chiefs. Phillip Rivers, in his 2 games against Kansas City last year, threw for exactly 1 touchdown and 6 interceptions. And the interviewer brought this up to Jeffrey Chadilla. He said, Phillip Rivers has never done well against the Chiefs. They have always had his number. And Chadilla said, well, yeah, but I expect Phillip Rivers to flip a switch, kind of like Drew Brees did a couple years ago. Flip a switch? What does that even mean? There's no evidence to that. That's beyond arbitrary. You could say that about anybody. You could say, I really expect Chad Henne to flip a switch this year and become the Chiefs starting quarterback and flip so many switches that he becomes a starting middle linebacker too. I think Chad Henne is going to start on both sides of the ball and make it to the Pro Bowl as an offensive quarterback and a defensive linebacker. He's going to flip a switch. I mean, you literally have just as much evidence for that claim as you do the claim that Jeffrey Chadilla made about Phillip Rivers. And not to dog on Jeffrey Chadilla. Again, like Colin Cowherd, I think he does a great job. But I have to bring this up. It's my civic duty to bring these kinds of things up. When I hear some of these people who are supposed to be in the know making these claims that are in no way supported by evidence or logic. So, to wrap up this segment, I have thought since last spring that the Chiefs have a great shot at repeating their division championship for a 3rd straight year. And my confidence in that grows with every passing day because there is some chaos right now in this division. Denver is in a worse spot than they have been in probably since the Tim Tebow era. You have Oakland with a new coach, a new system, and their best player on defense, probably their second best player on the field, in a holdout situation, a major contract dispute with talks that he may even wind up being traded before this is all said and done. And then meanwhile, the Chargers, everybody's darling, everybody's favorite, in complete shambles with injuries piling up left and right.
Anxiety among Chiefs fans continues to increase as linebacker Reggie Ragland is still nowhere to be found at training camp. Ragland started camp on the non-football injury list with swelling in the knee. Coach Andy Reid was quick to assure the media that the injury would not be a long-term concern. With the first preseason game less than a week away, there is speculation among some members of the media that the injury could be worse than the initial reports indicated. Ragland was acquired in a deal with Buffalo last year and is expected to be a contributor on this revamped Chiefs defense. This has been an Arrowhead headline. Now, back to the Red Gold Report.
And we're back. For this final segment here to close out the show today, we're going to enter into the realms of the hypothetical. And we're going to play at some fun speculation and conjecture as I break down the first 4 games of the season for the Chiefs this year. Now, before I begin, I'll tell you this. The Chiefs' schedule to start out is not friendly at all. They go at LA, at Pittsburgh, so 2 road games against tough teams to start off. They come home against the 49ers. Then they go to Denver for Monday Night Football. They come home again against the Jaguars. And then they go out to Foxborough to play the Patriots on Sunday Night Football before their bye. So their first 6 games of the season are a buzzsaw. 4 of those teams had winning records last year. 3 of those 6 teams had double-digit wins. 4 of the 6 games are on the road. Talk about an absolute buzzsaw of a schedule. Now, like I said, that's the first 6 games of the season. For this segment here, I'm just going to break down the first 4. I'll do this in a 4-part segment, and we'll go through the schedule, 25% of the schedule at a time. But today we're going to kick it off with the first 4 games. Now, I'll tell you up front, I think that they have the potential to be 3-1. Now, I'll tell you right now that's optimistic. I think 3-1 is definitely the best case scenario, but I think the worst case is 2-2. So really, there's a 1-game leeway here, and I think that game is the first game of the season in LA against the Chargers. The Chargers were 9-7 last year. They finished 13th in the league in scoring. They finished 3rd in the league in points allowed. Couple of key additions they made in the offseason. They drafted safety Derwin James. A lot of people are pretty high on him. And they acquired Mike Pouncey at center, who obviously has a phenomenal pedigree. Here's what I don't like about the Chargers. Their run defense is bad. They gave up an average of 4.9 yards per carry last year, which was worst in the NFL. And the only thing they really did to address that issue was drafting safety Derwin James. He's a guy that they believe can play strong safety or free safety and can potentially be a box player. I don't think that's enough to solidify a run defense that was dead last. Their rushing offense, for as high on Melvin Gordon as people are, and I think Melvin Gordon is going to be a star, but their rush offense last year averaged just 3.8 yards per carry. That's not good. This is a game that could go 50-50. I wish it wasn't the first game of the season. I wish it wasn't Patrick Mahomes' first true game as a starter. I know he started that game at the end of the year last year, but this is his first true game as the guy steering the ship. I'm going to pick the Chiefs because I think the Chiefs are the better team. I think they have the better coach. I think they have the better offense. And like I said in the first segment today, they tend to have the Chargers number. But if I had to pick a game that I'm really torn on in this stretch of 4, it's definitely this game against the Chargers. So after that, they go to Pittsburgh. Have to play the Steelers in Pittsburgh. God, I hate playing the Steelers. The Steelers are to the Chiefs what the Chiefs are to the Chargers. For whatever reason, the Steelers just tend to have the Chiefs number year in and year out. And the Chiefs lose these ugly, tough-to-watch games where the score tends to be close, but where Pittsburgh's really kind of in control the whole game. And I've got the Chiefs losing this one this year. If it were in Arrowhead, I might say 50-50, but probably would still pick the Steelers even in Arrowhead. On the road, in Heinz Field, I think this has to be a loss for the Chiefs. Now, I'll say this. There is a lot of discontent in the Steelers camp right now. Big Ben has not been too high on the idea of the Steelers potentially having drafted his replacement. He did not like that talk at all. But Big Ben tends to kind of be a little morose, tends to be a little abrasive. So there may or may not be anything to that. But I'll tell you right now, there is true animus in Le'Veon Bell. He is not happy with his contract, and he is a player who the Steelers need to be happy and to be productive. I don't think any of that is enough to cost the Steelers this game. I think the Chiefs get an L in Pittsburgh, 1-1, coming home for their first home game of the season against the Niners. Now, I like the Niners. I like Jimmy Garoppolo. The Niners are definitely a team who is trending upward, finished 6-10 last year, but I believe won 5 straight doing so. They were 20th in points scored last year, 25th in points against, so definitely bottom half of the league in both of those areas. Here's what I don't like about the Niners. Yeah, they added Richard Sherman, and he's a good cornerback. I think he'll help their secondary. But that's really all they did. They're banking on a couple of guys maybe coming back from injury and helping them out. But that always tends to be a big gamble. And their defense was bad last year. They had absolutely no pass rush whatsoever. And I don't think they did anything to address the pass rush. They didn't pick a defensive player until the 3rd or the 4th round of the draft. I worry a lot about their defense. As good as Jimmy Garoppolo is, I worry about the Niners' defense. And it is a weakness against a big-time strength. The Chiefs' offense, I think, is going to be phenomenal this year. I think the Chiefs win this one. May very well run away with it. So, Chiefs are 2-1, headed to Denver, to the Mile High City for Monday Night Football, their first primetime game of the year against the Denver Broncos, who finished 5-11 last year. Their points for were 26, their points against, they ranked 22nd, bottom half in the league in both of those. Their big acquisition in the offseason was Case Keenum, and I'll get into that here in a minute. They also drafted Bradley Chubb, who a lot of people think is going to be a plug-and-play type of player, someone who's going to have an instant impact, and I don't necessarily disagree with that. They lost Aqib Talib. I know Chiefs fans are not sad to see him go, but let's get back to their big acquisition, Case Keenum. Now, Case Keenum had a really good year last year in Minnesota. He passed for 3,500 yards, 22 touchdowns, 7 interceptions. I think he's definitely an upgrade to Trevor Siemian, but I'm pumping the brakes big time on Case Keenum because at the end of the day, he's had one pretty good year, but he did that on a really, really good team. And the rest of his body of work has been unimpressive to say the least. I'm not sold on Case Keenum. Now, he could prove me wrong. He could be great this year, but that's not what I'm projecting at this point in the season. I think the Chiefs get the win. So 3-1 is what I have the Chiefs at coming out of that 4-game stretch. If I'm wrong, it's week 1 against the Chargers. So worst case scenario, I could see the Chiefs being 2-2, but hopefully 3-1 because they have 2 pretty tough games after those first 4. But we'll get into that another time. That's a segment for a different day. So let's hear our final Arrowhead headline.
The Chiefs kick off their preseason schedule next Thursday, August 9th at 7:30 p.m. as they welcome Deshaun Watson and the Houston Texans to Arrowhead Stadium. You'll have all the pregame information you need, so be sure to subscribe and stay tuned in to the Red and Gold Report. Now, back to the show.
And that's our show for today. Thanks for tuning in. Be sure to subscribe and tune in next week as we prepare you for the Chiefs' first preseason game. This is the Red and Gold Report. God bless and go Chiefs.